Without a key message, it's really hard to build an effective story or a compelling ask when you're talking to your audience.
I think owning that message, believing that message, being that message ultimately is what will communicate when it comes down to it.
Key messages can be crafted, but they also need to be tested. They need to be used. They need to be recognised. You need that engagement with the audience to see what is resonating and how do we build on it.
Welcome to CommsCast with Jersey Road. My name's Gareth Russell, and today we are talking about key messages and why the crafting and development of key messages are so important. Today I'm joined by Jo Frost, who is the Director of Communication and Engagement for the Evangelical Alliance. Hi, Jo.
Hi, Gareth.
Nice to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
And Theresa Stone, who is the Training and Development Manager for Jersey Road. Theresa, welcome.
Thanks very much.
Nice to have you with us. So why don't we just start with a little bit about you guys, your background, what got you into comms and your journey so far. So, Jo, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your journey?
Sure. I didn't really know that comms existed as a career or as something that people did until actually quite late in my 20s. But I started working for a evangelistic charity, and a friend of mine talked about the fact that I was quite good at kind of PR and marketing, and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting. So I went off and did a master's in PR and communications, and then spent some time doing human rights and environmental campaigning. Came back and worked for a Christian organisation supporting the persecuted church. But for the last 7 years, I've been Director of Communications at the EA, which is an umbrella organisation helping individuals, charities and organisations make Jesus known across the UK.
That's great. And we'll talk a little bit maybe about how comms has changed during that time as well, because I think that'd be quite interesting to hear. But Theresa, tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. My background is as a broadcast journalist, and my passion was for speaking up for those who can't speak for themselves, communicating, and I guess my journey naturally led me into communications in third sector organisations, some national charities, some international charities, and then it's brought me along the way into the training field where I, at Jersey Road, do some training with our clients on speaking to the media and how to get your message across.
And you have the privilege of working with me, which
I do.
What an honour!
And a great
what an honour for you. Yeah,
yeah.
That is a joke, just in case anyone is wondering. So we're talking today about key messages, and key messages, I think, from my perspective, are often an undervalued area in comms. People often want to get to the outreach and the pitches and the social wins and all that sort of stuff, but forgetting to put the foundations in place of key messages is often something that people fall, or organizations fall into the trap of. Jo, just talk a little bit about why you think key messages are so kind of fundamental in the comms process.
Without a key message, it's really hard to build an effective story or a compelling ask when you're talking to your audience. I think it was Steve Jobs that said the task of getting to simple is one of the hardest and most complicated tasks in communications. And that's what key messages are. They're really simple. They're the absolute foundation of everything that you want to say. And they take a lot of work. It's easier often to write 1,000 words than it is to write 10.
Right.
And so a lot of people just want to kind of skip to the end. They know they've got a presentation coming up. They know they've got a media interview. Let's just write the script and we'll worry about the other stuff later. But actually, with your key messages, the rest of it flows so much easier. But it does take a lot of work. And I think it's the work that puts people off.
Theresa, have you got anything to add to that?
I think messaging is the essence of everything in communication. Without that, you literally don't have anything to say. And I think certainly in our media training at Jersey Road, one of the tips that we give is that you don't want to accept an interview unless you actually have something to say. And we all have things we're passionate about, amazing stories to tell. Certainly the organisations that we work with have some really, really valuable stories to share of good work they're doing. And without a message that's well refined, thought about and distilled, how can you go out there and tell people how to get involved? And that's the essence of messaging, is getting to the heart of everything that matters about what you're passionate about and what you're doing.
So a lot of people would hear what you're saying and think key messages sound very fundamental. They sound like a lot of fun. They sound like we want to get stuck into that. But Theresa, just talk a little bit about what questions organizations can be asking in order to start developing key messages.
I think the key question that your comms team need to answer is, how is the future going to look better because of our work? And if you can think about the problem that your work is solving and frame that for people in a way that's snappy, memorable, concise, then you've got to the heart of what you should be thinking about when you're composing your key messages.
And Joe, from your experience, there may be some people who feel overwhelmed because there's so many ways they could be speaking about their organization. How have you started that process and sort of honed some of the key messages at the beginning to find the clarity on that?
I think one of the things that I noticed at the start of crafting some of the key messages for the Evangelical Alliance was there was this sort of hesitation that some comsy person was going to walk in and write the key messages that didn't sound like the organisation, weren't authentic to the voice of the people that were speaking, and just had been sort of concocted in some office somewhere. And then all of a sudden you had this script that had nothing to do with you or how you wanted to present. And so actually one of the things that I started doing was just pulling people into a room and letting them talk about what they were seeing or what they were facing or what they were building or what they were trying to do. And then actually start to craft key messages from the actual words that were spoken in that room. Because as soon as you repeat back to somebody what they've said, one, they think it sounds great because it was their words, which is always helpful. But also there is an authenticity to it because it was their words. And key messages are going to be so much more effective and so much more memorable if they're coming from the people who are going to be sharing them.
Right.
So being able to start to hear what an organisation sounds like, what drives it, what they're up to, and use those words to form the key message, I found really helpful in the process.
Theresa, talk to me a little bit about how insights play a part here, because you could develop messaging and you could be very good at crafting a message, but there's still a process, isn't there, of understanding, will this actually land with the audiences I'm trying to engage? So how do insights play a part in that?
That's such a great question, Gareth. I think mainly it's about truth, isn't it? And hard evidence of truth. People love statistics, they love stories, they love case studies, anything that gives credibility to your truth as an organisation. So I think insights allows a deeper digging into what that truth is. So if you can research your target audience, because you need to know who you're messaging towards, and once you've got that, you can research them, understand what they need to know, and communicate more effectively to them. And you can do that in a number of ways through potentially focus groups, interviews with audience. But ultimately, yes, underpinning it with statistics, hard evidence, facts. That's going to really help with messaging. And
Joe, actually, I'll unpack a little bit about what you were saying as well, because I think the two align. So you've been in that room, you've come out with some messaging. It's in the voice of the people who've been speaking it. But how do you then get buy-in from the organisation and maybe from the key stakeholders or key audiences as well? How do you get buy-in at that point?
So I think, ironically, you probably need some key messages for key messaging.
Yeah, okay.
So
do you mean to communicate the value of them?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So if you've got a bit of work to do to win your organisation over, to persuade people that this is a good thing for them to adopt and to be a part of, then actually nailing that is going to, again, do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. So as Theresa's already said, like, what is the problem? Why is this going to help solve it? Sometimes, especially in my organisation, there's lots of people speaking on behalf of the Evangelical Alliance in loads of different spaces. So to sound like one voice, whilst there are many, many people speaking, is actually quite challenging. And nobody really wants to be told what to say. They want to be able to say their own thing. So actually helping them feel as if, A, their voice has weight and significance in a key message, but also saying you're going to achieve what you want to achieve. If you do this, it will be easier. It will be more effective. The insights back it up. The meeting that you're going into is more likely to get. You're going to get your end result if you use some of these tactics. That actually persuading people around the value of the key message, using the insights, using the storytelling, is probably going to help do a lot of the heavy lifting that you're going to need for the buy.
Yeah, so if you're speaking to the goals that they're trying to achieve and showing the value of where key messages can help them achieve those goals, if you're helping them understand that it doesn't have to be a robotic kind of or parroting of language, but rather something that's in their voice and authentic to them. And I'm assuming that first part of the process you talked about in terms of having the right people around the room, that is having the right stakeholders, the people who you want to have bought into this in that room, so that they don't feel like they're necessarily coming into the process further down the line.
Exactly. And sometimes even owning spaces where it's gone a little bit awry, or when the key message wasn't formed, and so actually you got more pushback, or there was a hint of vagueness in the media, or you had to go back out and clarify. Actually, sometimes using case studies within an organisation and go, actually, if we honed that, if we took that myth that we're constantly having to bust and we're constantly having to push back against because people keep saying this about us and actually we want to say this instead. If we put that up front and centre, you don't have to spend the next 20 minutes unpicking something. So you start to use what they're encountering, some of the problems that they're facing, putting the stakeholders in the room, wrestling through how to make sure that the key message does the work it needs to do. You're going to find that it's a lot easier for an organisation to adopt it.
Theresa, it's not just what you say, but it's how you say it, right? That engages people with these key messages. So, how do you encourage an organisation that's full of individuals to be able to speak authentically with a tone of voice? Does everyone have to speak in the same tone of voice? Does everyone have to say the same things? Or is it a bit more pliable than that, and a bit more flexible?
I think no one wants to hear a parrot kind of script and a robot speaking and saying, let's just do this, everybody. No one wants to hear that. I think we need to own our own voices. And I think that's why we pair messaging with media training at Jersey Road, because ultimately knowing how to own your own style of giving messaging out is part of the process, really. But I think also remembering that the essence of the message is the important bit. It's not the exact wording, and making it land with an emotional connection towards your audience, I think, is so important. If we think of some of the examples of some of the larger brands that we know of, you've got Nike, a slogan everybody's heard of, just do it, when it comes to exercise. Yes, everybody can say that, but you might find that you would say it in one way, Joe would say it in a different way, according to your own feelings about exercise, because it's not what we say, it's how we feel about what we say. So you're right. I think owning that message, believing that message, being that message, ultimately is what will communicate when it comes down to it.
And how's that worked, practically speaking, Joe, from the EA's perspective, when you have maybe a key messages document, or you've developed these over time, you've got these beautifully crafted messages.
It would be nice.
How do you then encourage people who are speaking on behalf of the organisation to stick to the spirit of the message, but not necessarily kind of be robotic in the process?
Yeah, I think I think it's been a multifaceted journey for us at the EA, because there are certain lines that we all say but feel very intrinsic. So I even said it in my introduction to you that we're an umbrella organisation that unites individuals, churches and charities because together we make Jesus known. That is the EA's key message.
Pretty impressive. Yeah.
Thank you. And you almost can't help but land it as an organisation, whether you're writing an introduction, a tweet, or introducing yourself. You'll hear all our spokespeople say that line over and over again, but always in their own tone of voice, always just slotted into a wider picture or story or narrative that they're telling, because that line is crucial to who we are, but it's contextualized within the person that's doing the speaking. Other times, it may be a value that we're expressing, or a motivation that we're talking about, or a goal that we're going after. And that can have a little bit more fluidity attached to it. So it won't necessarily be exactly the same words in exactly the same order, but the essence, like you said, the spirit behind it is always flowing through. So we're always talking, in my world, we're always talking about the gospel. We're always talking about speaking about the church and encouraging Christians within the church to make Jesus known in their spaces and places. We're always talking about being brave and kind and being generous, but being clear. Like, there's so much in our key messaging that isn't necessarily phrased. And it gives people a bit of freedom to know this is what I'm supposed to be saying, but I don't have to sound like a robot when I'm doing it.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, because when I was at university in the 1900s, they used to say that you needed 7 impressions to go from no awareness of an organization to an engagement decision. I believe that number is now 12 impressions because of the millions of messages that we get exposed to every day. And I think some organizations feel like they have to land the same phrase as you're not alluding to, but that same phrase 12 times in order for people. But it's actually more the perception of the brand. You have to land 12 times. Like, what are we speaking into? What's important to us as an organization? How are we saying things? What's our values? That type of thing. And that's what you're trying to build within the target audience's mindset.
I do a bit of comms training every now and then, and I use this little analogy. I give out a whole list of words, and they're all to do with going to bed. And I list them out, and some of the words are repeated. And some of the words top and tail. And given that 72% of all statistics are made up, I say that 60% of people remember the first and the last word that was spoken. 50% of people remember the repeated words. And 40% of people remember words that were never said. But they're still in the same theme. So when it comes to key messages, I always tell people, say the most important thing first, say the most important thing last, say the most important thing over and over again. And even then, people will hear words that you've never said. And just accept that. Yeah. So when it comes to key messages, you can get the theme across. If you've got something that you have to land, keep parroting it. But don't worry if there's a vagueness attached to how people receive it, because it's the essence of what you're saying that will still communicate through. And
I think the insights that you were talking about, Theresa, helps mitigate some of that, because you're able to test how are people hearing this message, but you can't completely mitigate it. As you say, there's always going to be people's experiences or how they use certain phrases and they understand it differently. Theresa, we work at Jersey Road with a number of organizations who are global and international and have global audiences. From a contextualization perspective, how can organizations best approach international audiences or global audiences when they're trying to still communicate those same messages?
Thanks for asking that. I think.
Do you mean that?
Yes, it's very simple, everybody. It's not simple, but I think to be universal, let's go back to that emotional connection. Ultimately, there are some simple things that we all recognise around the world, wherever we are. And that's where mind pictures come in, and creating, visual images with your messaging. If we look at large international companies or organisations and we look at their messaging, if you think of, say, KFC, you've got it's finger licking good. Okay, I've got a visual in my head. I've got an understanding that chicken is going to taste nice. You've got Airbnb. Everyone belongs somewhere, I think it is, or something like that. So you're thinking about the emotional connection. You're wanting to speak straight to the heart of the issue, and you're wanting it to be simple, 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 so that anybody in any country can kind of see it and understand it. And that's where less words come in. The shorter the message, the better. And also thinking about nuance as well. What's the context? Particularly with Christian organisations, you might want to think about what's the majority denomination in the country that I'm writing this message for? Do I want to speak directly to that denomination? Do I want to speak to people who aren't part of that faith network? You've got to be looking at who you're speaking to and nuancing the message and contextualising while appealing to as broad an audience as possible. So.
Yeah, great. So, Joe, just to get super practical on that then, some if we could just talk through some examples that you've seen in the media of great messaging that you feel has got cut through. Is there anything that you've seen that's really inspired you or you would hold up as a best practice?
Well, I think it was just really interesting that you were trying to remember what Airbnb's catchphrase was.
I didn't get that one right.
But isn't that the point?
Yeah.
That actually Airbnb, I don't know what the slogan is for Airbnb, but I know what it stands for because I see the image of Airbnb everywhere. It is about finding a home from home. It's about experiencing new places. It's about getting out of the kind of awful Travelodge hotel, but actually authentically going to a new place. That's what Airbnb offers. And it offers it universally, globally, but it's not based on words. It's based on impression. It's based on an encounter. It's based on imagination. I think that's incredibly helpful when recognizing that organizations, when you're speaking to a multiplicity of audiences in a variety of contexts, what is the absolute simplest thing that you're trying to say? And what's the visual or what's the imagination or where is that going to take you? I think Airbnb's lack of a slogan is probably one of the best examples of that going.
Well, it's exactly what you were saying about the spirit of the message.
Yeah.
So what you've just done, Theresa, is talk about the spirit of the message, you know, and that's what
the point.
That's what you're. So it doesn't, as you say, it doesn't matter if people are getting word for word. But are there any examples of where you've seen messaging really cut through? And
the cut through is fascinating. Yeah. So again, just pushing back on this idea that key messages are crafted in an office at a desk in isolation. I'm a bit of a political comms junkie. I love listening to different political commentators and watching political campaigns develop. And one of the things about that is it's all about cut through and it's all about engaging audiences, right? That's the whole point of a political campaign. Can you get enough people to buy into your message so that they're going to vote for you at the ballot box? And if we think about what's happening over the pond at the moment, obviously we're gearing up to the November presidential elections. Now, Trump's been running his campaign for a long time, and we have seen that where his messages land and what cuts through to his audience, and we know that. But it's actually really fascinating to watch Kamala Harris develop her key messages on the fly, quite late in the day, because obviously she wasn't going to be the Democratic candidate until Joe Biden pulled out. And I was watching this video of one of her first speeches right at the beginning of her campaign, and she was just talking. And the tweet just said, watch her discover her key message in real time. And she's talking and she gets to the end of the paragraph and she just said, so we're just not going back. And then the crowd suddenly start chanting, we're not going back, we're not going back, we're not going back. And she can't carry on. She's just laughing, looking quite uncomfortable. And they're just chanting back to her, we're not going back. Then she starts joining in because she's suddenly realised this is a key message, this is resonance, this is cut through. So she starts chanting it back to them. There's a call and response, but the audience has led it. Now, if you listen to her campaign messaging, we're not going back is a key refrain that all of her spokespeople, she the whole campaign are using, because they suddenly discovered it landed, it resonated with that audience. Key messages can be crafted, but they also need to be tested. They need to be used. They need to be recognized. You need that engagement with the audience to see what is resonating and how do we build on it. And I think political campaigns especially are really helpful case studies to recognize how that happens and how maybe we can adopt similar practices in our own spaces.
That's great. So Theresa, on that point of they need to be tested and measured and evaluated, how do you do that? How do you measure the effectiveness or otherwise of a key message?
I think there are lots of ways to do this, and deciding before you launch your key messages out there is super important. You decide your metrics. Are they going to be, we want to see our audience do a certain call to action? And how are you going to measure that? Could you measure that on the number of website clicks? Could you measure that on your number of social followers? You could potentially measure it on your level of brand awareness. And you could do some message testing. Again, you could do some interviews with your audience. Or you could simply do what Joe has described and get out there, talk at a church and see, what are the expressions on people's faces when I'm saying this message? Are they happy? Is it landing? That's a quick way to test it in real life.
We have a video that we use at the EA to help promote our charity. And one of my colleagues is saying that he always knows when that room is with him and for him, because there's this little, there's a little joke in the video. And if the crowd laughs, he knows that that it's going to be a good day. If it's silent, he's like, I'm going to have to work harder, because there's that immediate engagement, and he knows, he's looking out for it. He's waiting. Am I going to get my laugh, or is it going to be quiet? And I think it's exactly that, getting into churches, meeting people in front of you and hearing whether or not that message is resonating, and is that connection forming and building. And if it's not, you're going to have to go back out again, and you're going to have to craft it and amend it and tweak it, because you need that engagement when it comes to your audience.
Which brings us back to insights again, because really what this is market research, right?
Exactly.
So what Kamala Harris was doing was market research, because she was saying something, getting a response from the market, and then repeating that. So we're going to come to a close, but just if we're just going to give people who are listening or watching some practical, very simple, these are some of the things, if you're going to start your key messaging journey, this is what to start with. Theresa, what would be some of the very practical takeaways for people who are watching or listening to this?
I think ultimately deciding, what are you saying at the moment? What do you need to be saying? What do people most need to know about your work this year? And then getting your comms team in the same room and having a discussion about it. Putting some words down on paper and having something to work with. Obviously contacting Jersey Road. But yes, no one likes to be told what to do.
Yeah. And Joe, anything to add to that?
I think that key thing for me, what you just said, was the start of the key messaging journey, is the permission that your key messages don't have to be a finished product before you go out and share them, that actually you can craft key messages in real time. They can be tweaked, they can be adapted, they can move and develop. You don't have to get it perfect before you start using them. I think takes some of the pressure off an organisation to get it absolutely spot on perfect first time out, that actually key messages are constantly being formed, refined and adapted. So just start and know that it doesn't have to be perfect, but that it will improve, and you're allowed to get it wrong. But the more you get it wrong, the closer to right you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great way to end. Joe, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for your time today. Theresa, thank you for being part of this podcast. We hope you found this helpful today. There's been so much to take away from this, I think, in terms of keeping it simple. I think making sure there's insights in the process and making sure you've got the right people around the table, and then continuing to test that messaging as you evolve it are all what I've found very helpful, and I hope you have too. If you want to search for Jersey Road, where you can do it on wherever you search for stuff, just search for Jersey Road and comms. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. We hope you found this helpful, and we'll speak to you next time. See ya.